Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. I'm Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside Bill Bender, our national college football writer at sportingnews.com, and president of the Football Writers Association of America. Today, we are welcoming a former Football Writers Association of America president, Andrea Adelson from ESPN, the world's foremost expert on ACC football. Andrea, thank you so much for making time for us this morning.
Well, thank you, guys. And I just want to congratulate Bill Bender on taking on the role. I hand all of the good and the bad over to him, but I know he's going to do a great job. And it was awesome serving alongside him this past season. So, Bill, take it away. You'll do great.
Well, I was going to say, you set the high, ridiculous bar of knocking out the Eddie Robinson Award presentation. It was about as good a job as I've ever seen somebody MC an event. And now I'm like, I have to do that next year. So we're going to have to pick one. We'll have to pick a Big Ten coach, two, or a MAC coach. And then from there we go. But you were outstanding in that. And we thought we were going to pick your brain a little bit. There isn't a better person to talk about ACC too. And you've got a storyline or two coming out of that conference this year.
Now, sure Andy, do. It's going to be a fun time.
He makes me call him Mr. President now, which
I do not.
As he should. And by the way, like every time I came on the ACC network this year, it was always, we welcome in El Presidente. And I asked if they could just keep that going. Because, it makes you feel good when someone calls you El Presidente.
Well, that's Angelique, real quick before we get Angelique Chengelis from the Detroit Daily News, she was texting me back and forth, emailing me back and forth. Then the first email said, Mr. President. I was like, come on, Angelique. I've known you for 10 years. I'm not going by that. She does a fantastic job as well. So
before we get into it, Andrea, we always have a Trocchi trivia question to kick off the show.
Okay.
I try to stump Bender. I usually do not stump him because he's an encyclopedia. But today, when we have a guest, all right, we ask the question, then we answer it at the end of the show.
Okay.
So the whole show, you're thinking about it in the back of your head. You're distracted while you're trying to do the other questions. So I will ask the question, then we will answer it at the end of the show. It is ACC based in honor of your presence.
Okay.
SMU made the ACC championship game in year one of joining the league, giving the Mustangs one appearance in the ACC title game. There are now 6 teams who have made exactly one appearance in the ACC championship game. Who are the other 5?
Just one. Only one appearance in the ACC championship game.
Correct. Right. SMU is the 6th team on that list.
Okay.
So
all right.
We'll answer that at the end of the show. So we want to get into the ACC, but first, we just want to get your quick opinion. You are obviously covering the CFP this year, the expansion, everything like that. So if we're going from 4 teams to 12 teams, I just wanted to get your take real quick on whether the transition was smoother than you thought it was going to be, less smooth than you thought it was going to be. And then what do you think we'll see in 25? And then I guess more importantly, 26, moving forward.
I was not a fan of going to 12. I felt like it was going to be too many teams. I was more of an 8-team playoff gal myself, but I'm here to admit I was wrong. I thought it was wonderful, to be honest, because you had an opportunity to see a bunch of different schools that maybe haven't had the chance to be in a playoff. You just mentioned SMU, for them to have that opportunity year one in the ACC, a school like Indiana, for example, as well, those 2 schools to have that chance. I think it goes to show you, and Boise State too, right? I mean, my first job at ESPN back in 2010 was covering the group of 5 schools. Back then it was non-AQ, right? Non-automatic qualifying schools. And that was when they were at the top of their game, right? Kellen Moore, now the Saints coach, which again is like mind blowing because he was the guy leading the charge for Boise State. And they could never quite get there because they were, outside looking in. And so to see them make a playoff after all the hard work they have done to get to that point, I firmly believe having the 12 opens this thing up to more than just the usual suspects. Now, did it end with the usual suspects? I mean, yeah, I think going into it, I felt like it would end with the teams that usually are in contention for a national championship. But I think it was great for college football to see more teams get invited in. There were some compelling games, maybe not the first round games, but moving forward, there were. So I thought it went really great. And every athletic director that I have talked to thought it was terrific. Really enjoyed it. Moving forward, they're probably going to expand it out, and whether that's a good thing or not, we can sit here and debate. And I'm just not sure the top, four or the top four conference finishers are going to get those top four spots. I feel like that's probably going to go away starting in 26. Just an opinion.
Were you at SMU or Clemson first round?
I didn't go anywhere in the first round. I was at the quarter, semi, and national championship game.
So I was going to say, so you got a chance to watch SMU and Clemson in its entirety. And
yes,
after the entire Florida State firestorm the year before, would you say that the ACC has the waters on all of that talk have calmed down because they got two teams in? And because, SMU had a tough matchup. I understand that, but I thought Clemson played Texas very well, and you got two berths, which is kind of like, that's not a best case, but a good case scenario for a conference like the ACC.
Yeah, I think it was best case, especially considering the discussion leading up to the ACC championship game was whether SMU would make it in regardless of the outcome. And there was so much fear on Sunday about them getting left out. Up until it was announced, I think there were a lot of people who just weren't sure. And even talking to Rhett Lashley and their athletic director, Rick Hart, immediately after the game, they started that lobbying. And we saw that from Mike Norvell a year ago. I feel like SMU was maybe even more vocal about it, just seeing what had happened to Florida State the year before that. So I think the fact that they were able to make it in despite losing was huge for the conference. Now, no one advanced, and the bowl record as a whole was terrible for the conference. But to be able to get two teams in year one, and one of them being your standard bearer in Clemson, when maybe a lot of people didn't think they'd have that chance to make it in, or thought after the South Carolina loss, Clemson is done. The fact that they were able to do that and play a competitive game through the fourth quarter, especially as a springboard for potentially them as a preseason pick. I think they will be the preseason pick. I'm ready to say that now in February. I think they will be the preseason pick in the ACC in 2025, to have that experience with guys who hadn't been in the playoff, now knowing what it takes with a veteran group returning, I think is big for Clemson. It's big for the ACC. And so, yes, I would say getting two teams in, despite all of that language in those final few weeks, was big for the conference, but they're not satisfied because losing in the first round is not anything anybody in the league wants.
Speaking of Clemson, we Bender put together like a composite, way too early top 25 from everybody, the 8 or 9 outlets that do those rankings, et cetera, et cetera. And, Clemson's in the top 10. They're number 7 in the composite. And yesterday I was going down this list. 6 of the top 10 are going to have new quarterbacks. Some of them are going to have quarterback battles this spring. Clemson kind of stands out as one that doesn't have to go through that. So how do you think that sort of affects their approach to next year?
Yeah, I think it's huge for them. Especially when you consider the performance of Cade Klubnik last year. And I don't think he got enough credit for the type of improvement and consistency he showed game to game. That was his best season by far. It was the defense, quite frankly, that let them down for majority of the season in those losses. When you look at just a terrible performance against Louisville at home, defense gave up 200 something rushing yards. Obviously the defense was a problem against South Carolina, not being able to hold on to that lead at the end. And then of course what we saw against Texas. So you understand that why Dabo Swinney made the decision to make a change at defensive coordinator, because you saw the strides the offense made with Cade Klubnik this past season. And you have something to build on. You're basically returning your entire core of wide receivers. You're returning a strong offensive line. Phil Maffa might be gone, but you feel good about who you have in your backfield. Now you finally got the offense back to a place where they can score points like we saw under Trevor Lawrence. Haven't quite gotten to that point until this past season. So to me, that's what puts Clemson, quite frankly, in the driver's seat in the ACC headed into this season, because you look at their offense and who they have coming back and the strides that they made, and finally being in sync with Garrett Riley and what he wants to do, and Cade being comfortable in that system. You make a change at defensive coordinator, you're bringing some really good players back to that defense. And it just feels like you've got to capitalize right now if you're Clemson. And a lot of that is because of Cade Klubnik coming baback.
Well, and so Tom Allen, I'm obviously familiar with him from Indiana to Penn State, and emotional coach. I know when you've done this for a while, when you have a coordinator come into a place like Clemson, like him, who's been a head coach and did what he did at Penn State, where I've kind of felt like, well, just don't mess it up. You have Abdul Carter, you have all those guys. What's the biggest difference you see he will make? Because I know Clemson has talent on that side of the ball. What do you think, or what have you heard that might be the biggest difference that he brings to that unit?
Well, I think number one is experience, right? I mean, when you look at the transition they made from Brent Venables to Wes Goodwin, he'd never been a coordinator before. He'd never called a game before. And in talking to several ACC coaches last year, just about like, what are you seeing out of the Clemson defense? I mean, it was so strange to see Clemson's defense be reactionary, not aggressive, not setting the tone, not getting push up front, being bad against the run, and not really getting the TFLs and sacks that we're used to seeing Clemson getting. It was just kind of like, what is going on here with this defense? It's just not a typical Clemson type defense. And a lot of the coaches that I talked to in the league just said there was a tentativeness about them, and that Goodwin wasn't sure when to be aggressive, when to pull back, like when to make the right calls. Should we try and stop the run or worry about the pass? It just felt like this was a team that wasn't quite sure of itself. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that Wes Goodwin, maybe without that experience, trying to learn on the job, you can't really do that at a place like Clemson. And so from my vantage point, seeing the job that Tom Allen did this past season at Penn State, but also the experience that he has and knowing what he's doing, the fact that Penn State defense kind of picked up where they left off with Manny Diaz in terms of that aggressive mindset, aggressive nature. What they did last year with Abdul Carter and those guys up front, typically that's what Clemson does themselves defensively. And so in my view, it's a great fit because they can get back to the things that have made Clemson such a standout on defense. And you bring guys back like Peter Woods, TJ Parker. They signed a defensive end from Purdue out of the transfer portal, knowing defensive end was a weak spot. They need to be able to improve and upgrade there. I think they've done that. And so from my perspective, having somebody now who knows how to call a game, who knows how to get his guys in position to make those types of plays. The linebackers, I thought, radically underperformed a year ago. And Barrett Carter was good, but I think he could have probably been on another level last season. To me, you put all those pieces together with the guys coming back, the aggressiveness, the experience of a play caller like Tom Allen, who also, it seems as though, has the same sort of like mindset, culture, belief system as Dabo. And that to me is what I think can put Clemson now back to a place where they can dominate defensively the way that we're used to seeing.
All right, ESPN's calling it. It's over. Clemson, number one in the ACC. That's it. We're not even going to have to play the season. Let's talk about last year's number one, or regular season number one, SMU. Can they kind of rebuild here? They got Kevin Jennings back, right, at quarterback. But I think his top five receivers are gone. The Brashard Smith, 1,600 yards out of the backfield between rushing and receiving. He's gone. They got, I think, Chris Johnson Jr. coming over from Miami as a transfer. The schedule, Baylor and TCU non-conference, not easy. And then Clemson and Miami come on the schedule. They dodged both of them last year. So Rhett Lashley's got some challenges here in year two.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question the degree of difficulty on the schedule is ratcheting up for them this year. I actually had a chance to talk to Rhett last week. He was in Orlando for a Nike coaches clinic. And so, of course, anytime I see ACC guys coming out, I'm like, oh, better go out there and get some time in. And, he feels good about the guys that they have coming back. If you look at SMU, I believe, according to Max Olson, who's our portal guru, among Power Four schools, they had the fewest players leave. Their retention was the highest among returning guys. Now, they did have a lot of seniors, as you mentioned, who are moving on. But, Rhett told me there were 10 guys that they identified on the roster that they absolutely had to keep. And they were able to do that. And it starts with Kevin Jennings. And we all saw what happened against Penn State. And that was quite honestly an anomaly.
Yeah, he didn't play like that all year. People are like, SMU doesn't belong. I'm like, he didn't play like that all season.
He played badly against Duke, but they were able to win that game. But aside from that one, he hadn't played like that all year. I mean, he had been a guy that made all the right decisions for them and put them in position to make it to the ACC championship game and be 8-0 in league play. Now, again, the schedule maybe wasn't what it's going to be this season. But they handled TCU last year. I mean, that was a total beatdown in that game. And that was with Kevin Jennings, I believe, making his first start after they kind of struggled earlier on in the season. So, they get Kevin Jennings back. They're able to keep him. RJ Maryland is coming back after that torn ACL. That's going to be huge for them. Isaiah Nakwobia, who is their top defensive player, their safety, he's coming back. So, Rhett feels good that they were able to get that core group who was coming back to be able to stay at SMU. And I think the other thing that was really encouraging for him this past season was the work that they did on the offensive and defensive lines to be able to make that transition to the Power Four. I mean, that is something that they targeted as an absolute need. We have to be good up front. Every single coach that he talked to who made that transition from Group of Five to Power Four said you have to address the front. And they did a terrific job with that. And I think they'll continue to do a good job because they saw just how foundational that could be for them. So there's no reason a school like SMU that is in the place where they are in Dallas and has increased their efforts recruiting wise, has been successful in the transfer portal, has money, is able to retain its players, should be out of the mix in my view. And I think Rhett truly believes that. He's coached in the ACC before. He knows what it takes. Yeah, the schedule gets a little bit harder, but he feels like they're in a place right now where they are going to have an opportunity year after year to at least be in that mix, to be in the top half of the conference, to be in position where they can win some games and be there in November when it comes time to trying and get into an ACC championship game. So he feels really good about where the program is right now. Obviously, the strides that they made last year, whether they can replicate it or not, we're going to see in 25. And I think people are probably going to have some questions, especially after the way Kevin played in that playoff game. But he feels really good about the direction of where they're headed.
Yep, you're on mute there, Bender.
Well, speaking of Dallas, 10 years ago, I was at a Patriots-Cowboys game, and I got my first Bill Belichick experience in a press conference where I asked him a question about Dion Lewis, a former Pitt guy, and I'm going to be honest, I was happy that I didn't get a 2-word answer. He gave me the Dion made plays inside, Dion made plays outside. And that was an experience as a reporter because I don't get nervous often, but I'm like, what if he basically puts me on a poster that I asked a terrible question? So that's a long-winded way of saying, how ready are you for the Bill Belichick experience in Chapel Hill? And more so to me, do you think the tone will be different than the New England Belichick we got, where he gave all the one-word answers, and it was like Cold War secrecy in those walls? Do you think it'll be a little more open on the college side with him?
I've been told not to expect it to be different or more open in the college side. I mean, he has not spoken since his press conference beyond going on the Pat McAfee show, right? I mean, there has been no media press conference. They just did have their general manager, Michael Lombardi, gave a press conference earlier this week and had a lot of, great things to say about how things are going. I will say I thought Bill had some one-liners, in his press conference in December that maybe was kind of like, oh, wow, he's got some jokes. And it was a little surprising because I was prepared for him to also be very short, and he wasn't. But I don't expect that, to continue, because once we get into the business of spring ball in the season, what's the difference whether you're coaching the Patriots or New England or UNC? You want to win, right? And you don't want to give away secrets. And in college, you're always trying to get a leg up on trying to figure out what those secrets are. So, I expect him to be the way that he is, because that's just part of the Bill Belichick experience, right? But I will say that, like, listening to what recruits have said, we had a really good piece on our website from Eli Letterman, our recruiting guy, who talked to recruits who are just like starstruck when he walks into the building. He brings a cachet with him that even Mac Brown, who, again, like, college football Hall of Famer, like legend. I think the cachet with Bill Belichick is even more than what Mac Brown brings with him, because you've got this natural curiosity about how this, NFL legend and this 6-time Super Bowl champion is going to handle recruiting in a shirt and tie. Who knew he was going to come into schools in a shirt and tie and a jacket? So, I think that's helped them a lot on the recruiting trail, with what they've been able to do. There's question marks about the roster, don't know what exactly they're doing at quarterback right now. Big question marks there. And they lost some guys, but they also were able to bring some guys back. So, spring will be interesting, but I will tell you, like, we've been asking, all right, we got the practice dates yet? Not yet. So still, it's Feb 13 and I still don't have a spring football. They're the only ACC school where I don't have a spring football schedule or a spring game date for just yet. They're working on it. I'm told they're working on it. So that's just like one small reason why I feel like that's probably going to be like the Patriots.
I was looking at Lombardi's, resume basically. And like, he hasn't been in college for 40 years, just the Belichick's, even longer than that. Belichick has zero experience. Lombardi has very little. He hasn't been in football in 8 years. And then, Belichick hired his son as defensive coordinator. He hired his other son as safeties coach. He hired Lombardi's son as quarterback's coach from Lanning's staff, where he was just an offensive assistant. Late in the New England tenure, he put a defensive coordinator at offensive coordinator, and that didn't work very well either. So a little concerned if I'm a UNC fan about the filling out this staff. I mean, it's hard to question a guy who has 6 rings, but late in his tenure, the drafting and the personnel on his staff was not great in New England. I don't know how he's going to, he's starting from scratch experience-wise from the college perspective. I gave grades. I did a grades thing for Highlanders, and, I was like, this could be an A. He could run circles around all the other ACC coaches, or it could be an F. He has no idea what he's doing. I said, if it's closer to an A than an F, it's still only going to be short-term because of his age, because his son is a defensive coordinator. He'll want to hand the reins over either if he does well and then goes to the NFL, get back to the NFL potentially to try and break Don Shula's record or whatever. It's hard to give this a good grade because I just don't feel like, even if it is successful, which it might not be, it's setting you up for a nice long-term run. I don't know if you agree with that theory or not, but I don't know. How do you think it's going to play out? You've talked to people about, what it's like right now, and they're still being secretive and stuff like that, but what do you see in the fall and maybe the next fall?
So I have their schedule right here, and I think they have got one of the more favorable ACC schedules, quite frankly, when you look at the way this thing is going to lay out for them. Their opener is against Clemson, and it's at home. At Cal, Virginia at Syracuse, Stanford at Wake Forest, Duke at NC State. 3 teams who didn't make bowl games last year in the ACC. And just about everybody in the ACC made a bowl game a year ago. So from my vantage point, already right out of the gate, they've got a favorable ACC schedule. I think there's a couple of things here. Number one, North Carolina hasn't won an ACC title in more than 40 years. And they had Mac Brown twice, a college football Hall of Famer, coached them twice, including in 97 when they got as high as number 5, but Florida State was in their way and they couldn't quite, get past them. And then he had Drake May in this last tenure, made an ACC championship game, couldn't quite get past Clemson. There was always something kind of in their way. And even when we thought they'd be good, they weren't. and had a hard time kind of meeting that level. So I think you're dealing with a lot of history that tells you it's extremely difficult to win at a place like North Carolina, even though we all wonder, how is it so hard to win at North Carolina, right? They're in a great state for recruiting. They've got resources. They're going to have even more resources at their disposal now. When you look at the investment the university is making, not the athletic department, the university is making in football with support staff and what's coming with revenue share, so on and so forth, right? They should have everything at their disposal. But like you, I have significant questions about how this is going to work for a staff that has never coached in college. It's great to say you want to be the 33rd NFL team, which is what they're telling recruits. And Michael Lombardi said it the other day. And Belichick said it at his opening press conference, right? We want to run this like the NFL. Well, this is not the NFL. As much as it's moving in that direction, it's not. You're still dealing with 18 to 22-year-old college kids who have to go to class, have to maintain their academic eligibility, have other stuff going on in their lives that they have to manage and that you in turn will have to manage because sometimes those things come up and can affect a young person. So it's not college. It's moving toward that direction. And because there's questions on the staff too, and I agree with you, and it's been very secretive, by the way, in terms of who's on that staff, like no announcements. It's just kind of all via sourcing. I'm fascinated to see how this is all going to play itself out because I have more questions right now than anything. But at the same time, it's really hard to doubt a guy who's won 6 Super Bowls. He knows how to coach. He knows how to scheme. He knows how to put guys in position to win. And if you look at the ACC, top to bottom, are we really going to sit here and be like, Bill Belichick can't win in the ACC? I mean, think about that, right? Like, think about what this league was a year ago. It was great that they got 2 teams in, but ... right? Your power programs, Florida State, Virginia Tech, where were they? Miami at the end couldn't hold up their end of the bargain, right? And Clemson, right? Yeah, we think it's going to be Clemson. Great. Okay, but we don't think there's going to be like a place in the top half of the conference for North Carolina. That I find that hard to believe with Bill Belichick as the head coach. So I'm trending more toward, I feel like there's potential there, but I'm not ready yet to make a declarative statement about how this is going to go for North Carolina until I actually can get more information in my hands about what this all is going to look like from a practice perspective. Let's just start with spring ball. Let's just see how they look in spring ball.
Well,
if we're allowed to look at what they are in spring ball.
If you're allowed. So
if we're allowed.
One more before we get you out. One more team I wanted to ask you about because I'm looking at their 2 deep right now and I'm seeing about 21 transfers. I picked Florida State to win the ACC last year. And I've covered this sport however many years, and I've never seen anything like it, where you go from dominant guys that are playing on Sunday this year, like Verse and others. And I'm trying to like do the math of how can you go from that to that? And is it the constant game of transfer roulette where you're bringing in so many guys? How much of it was quarterback? They're not in the composite top 25. I don't think they'll be ranked, but what is the level of anxiety for Florida State? And they do open with Alabama, right?
They do at home.
On top of everything else,
yep.
You have that. So, what's the forecast there? And I almost want to ask you, what is Florida State? And that's such a bad question, but it's almost like a existential question at this point, what we're going to get with them next year.
Yeah. I have followed Florida State for the last 15 years now, through the end of the Jimbo Fisher era, through the Willie Taggart era, through the beginning of the Mike Norvell era. That was the worst team I have ever seen. And that's saying something. They weren't a team. They were not a team. So that qualifies you as being one of the worst teams because they actually were not a team. And so in trying to kind of figure out, well, what in the world happened here? I think there's a few things. I think, number one, you mentioned the transfer roulette. they missed on a bunch of guys for the first time in the portal. I mean, they had such a tremendous amount of success in the portal to get them to where they were in 2023, right? And with guys who were there multiple years, you mentioned Jared Verse. Well, he was there for 2 years, right? Trey Benson was there for 2 years, right? They at the outset, when they were looking at their roster, trying to build this program back up, they felt like we need the portal, and then we'll like work ourselves back through our recruiting, but we've got to have the portal and we've got to have it now. And to do that, we got to sign guys who have multiple years of eligibility. They can't just be one and done. So if you look early on at what they did with the portal, they were targeting guys for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, guys who could be there for 2 years. And that kind of helped them flip the script in a way where you had some of that carry over year to year. Guys who were able to lay the foundation, what the work ethic was going to look like. Guys like a Jared Verse, who took complete command of that team. Jordan Travis, same thing, right? He came in under Taggart, but he was there for multiple years and had the leadership down. Well, you look at last year, right? You lose the bulk of that 2023 team, okay? Now you haven't really developed well your high school recruits. You just haven't done a good enough job, quite frankly. And if you look at their all ACC players, I do not believe any of them they recruited out of high school. They've been their transfer guys. Okay. So when you're not developing what you need to develop on the high school level, well, guess what? You got to keep going into the portal because it's not working. You still have holes to fill. Last year, they took a different approach in the portal. They went after a lot of guys who were former 4 and 5 stars at elite programs like Alabama, like LSU, places like that. And it didn't work because they didn't have guys who were hungry to prove themselves the way that a Jared Verse from Albany was, or a guy like Braden Fisk from Western Michigan was, right? Even a guy like Keon Coleman at Michigan State felt like he had to play with an edge his last year there. So you're missing guys who are coming in there with a chip, with something to prove. And Mike Norvell was also here in Orlando at the Nike Coaches Clinic. And one of the things that he said that really stuck out to me was we didn't play with desperation. We didn't have guys who had that edge. We had no leaders. So when you're not playing with desperation, you're not playing with an edge, and you have no leaders, what do you have? Just a bunch of guys out there running around and not really putting in what they need to put in to win games. He's like, I'm not saying they didn't try hard. They tried, that we were missing something. And Mike blames himself for not having the type of accountability that he needed to have. And there were coaches he felt like didn't have the type of accountability that they needed to have. And they've made changes across the board with their coaching staff. And so one of the things he mentioned was a lot of the guys coming back who were transfers in their second year, like a Roydell Williams from Alabama, Daryl Jackson from Miami. They're in year 2 now. And Florida State has had success when they've had their portal guys in year 2. What he's seen from them in their offseason workouts at least gives him some encouragement that there's maybe a little bit more of this desperation or an edge to them. But we're not going to know what Florida State is going to be or what they're going to look like until Alabama. And you know, this game reminds me a lot of Florida Miami, right? Because you've got 2 teams. The loser, the fan base is just going to be like, the world is ending, fire our coach, right? That's going to be the immediate reaction. I don't think Mike Norvell's on the hot seat. I don't think he's in any trouble at Florida State. I've had extensive conversations with him, their athletic director. They feel good about the changes that they've made to get the program headed in the right direction. If you look at their schedule, it sets up nicely for them in the ACC. They've also got 3 ACC teams that did not make bowl games from a year ago. So if they can get past Alabama and find some sort of a groove, and they get Miami early at home, October 4th, if they can get some of that confidence going, right? Like imagine how different things might have been if they beat Georgia Tech in that opener. If they can get some of that confidence back and play with that edge Mike wants them to play with, it'll be a good year for them.
Yeah, and I think Thomas Castellanos would be a good fit with Malzahn,
Right.
that offensive coordinator. He was
Yes.
not a great fit with Bill O'Brien. The previous year at BC, he was really, really effective getting out of the pocket, making crazy plays and things like that. O'Brien did not want him to do that.
Yep.
His rushing attempts went way down, and then he essentially lost his job and left the team. So I think Malzahn signed him at UCF right out of high school. Yeah, so that might be a good thing for a first-year transfer that Florida State fans can hopefully hold on to. So, all right, well, we got to get you out of here, but first we got to go back to the Troche trivia question.
Right, the
and
trivia
make
question.
sure we see you forgot about it.
I did forget about it, but okay, so I'm going
SMU,
to
SMU made the ACC championship game last year, and they became the 6th team to make one appearance in the ACC championship game since it started however many years ago.
Okay.
How many of the other 5 teams can you name, Andrew? You say a guess, then I'll have Bill say a team, and you say a team. We'll go back and forth like that.
I think we can get all 5.
I think we can.
What you got?
All right, Louisville.
Louisville is correct, 2023.
Okay. That's right. Okay.
Does Notre Dame count?
Notre Dame, 2020. You are correct. That's 2. That was the tricky part of the question.
Wow. Thank you, Bill, because I don't think Notre Dame would have occurred to me, because I'm like going in alphabetical order on the schools.
Well, your best friend isn't, or maybe your best friend, maybe they are, but my best friend is a Notre Dame fan that reminds me constantly that they don't need a conference. And I was like, the one year you did it, and he'll always fall back on, oh, we did it one year and it was fine. So it wasn't fine in the playoff, but go ahead.
It was not. Bravo. Excellent guess. All right, Virginia.
Virginia, 2019. That's 3.
Yep.
Oh, dear. Okay, so
2 more.
I know. Duke.
Duke.
Yes.
2013. You are correct. We got one team to go. It's a stumper.
Okay, so I know who has made. I know like the teams that have made multiple appearances. I think no, it's not that school. Okay, NC State has never made it. Syracuse has never made it.
I think I have it, but I don't want to be wrong.
Well, you can both get. I won't say the answer, so you can both submit.
I believe Georgia Tech has multiple appearances. I'm going in the way back machine right now to when they played in Jacksonville, and then they played Florida State one year in Charlotte.
And Wake has multiple, correct?
Wake has multiple. Yes, so by process of elimination, and I feel like I may be wrong on this because I thought they made multiple appearances, but I could be wrong. Boston College.
Bender, what's your guess?
I'm going to guess Miami.
You are correct, Bill Bender.
I thought Miami made 2 appearances.
And that's why I didn't want to be wrong, because in the back of my head, I'm like, did they go another year without Mark Richt? 2017
is it. That is it.
That's crazy. So
all right, Bill, you are now the ACC reporter for ESPN. Congratulations.
I could tell you I know who's won the Big Ten championship game pretty much all the way through. I can get that one with because it's mostly Ohio State or Michigan until last year. So that was a lucky guess of sorts, because the only reason I was going to, when I originally sketched this out, I had Wake down. But as you know, I know Jim Grobe really well. And I forgot that they went with Sam Hartman. So I'm glad I got that one out of the way.
Right. And Pitt's been twice. So BC, I think, played Virginia Tech
a couple times,
right? With Matt Ryan.
07, 08. Yep.
So it's my. I thought Miami had a second appearance with Manny Diaz. So
Well, and I'll close it with that. Is like, I still remember where I was working for a newspaper when Miami played Florida State first time when they went in the ACC, and I remember the assumption being, okay, we're going to see this in the ACC championship game every year, and somehow Miami's only been in that game one time. That is the craziest statistic to me, that they've never won the ACC.
Yeah. So, still, they were supposed to do it last year. That was my pick. Right. They were my pick, and they were so close, and yet.
Yep. There you go.
Well, Andrea, no shame. I never stump Bender. I never stump him. It's unbelievable. So anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Irish Breakdown, your source for Notre Dame football information. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you soon.